It's one of the most frightful locations in Middle-earth, inhabited by evil spirits who would use the bones of dead soldiers as they haunt the tombs of the fallen. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the Barrow-downs and the Barrow-wights. While the Barrow-downs would most notably come into the story of the late Third Age, their origin is much earlier. In the First Age, some of the earliest men would live for a time in Eriador, before crossing the Blue Mountains into Beleriand. These men are the ancestors of the Edain, the men who would ally with the elves in their battles against Morgoth. Before their migration, they built many of these burial mounds in the area. During the dark years of the Second Age, when many men fell under the sway of Sauron, Dunlandings migrated from the valleys of the White Mountains to the empty lands as far north as the Barrow-downs. Much later in the Second Age, after the faithful come to Middle-earth with the downfall of Numenor, Elendil establishes the Kingdom of Arnor, which includes the Barrow-downs. The Arnorians held the Barrow-downs in honor, since many of the burial mounds were built by their ancestors. They, in turn, begin a tradition of burying their lords and kings there. In 861 of the Third Age, with the death of King Earendur, Arnor is split into 3 separate kingdoms, each ruled by one of his sons. The kingdoms are Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. The Barrow-downs fall within the lands of Cardolan. Nearly 600 years later, the splinter kingdoms are 50 years into a war against the Witch King's kingdom of Angmar. In 1409, a large army from Angmar invades and defeats the men of Cardolan, ravaging the lands. Some of the Dunedain had defended the Barrow-downs in this battle, or had fled into the nearby Old Forest. Eventually, the forces of Angmar are defeated by elves from Lindon, Rivendell, and Lothlorien, though it would only be temporary. In 1636, Cardolan would fall prey to a different kind of terror. In that year, Sauron sends forth the Great Plague, which would wreak havoc on the lands of Middle-earth. Cardolan is hard hit, with most of its population dying from the plague. With the massive depopulation of the realm, the Witch King sends evil spirits from Angmar and Rhudaur to the Barrow-downs to inhabit the deserted barrows in order to prevent any reemergence of Cardolan. We don't know exactly what these evil spirits were. Some possibilities are corrupted Maiar, or the spirits of orcs, evil men, or fallen Avari elves. These spirits animate the bones of dead men buried within the barrows, appearing as shadowy figures, with pale light coming from what would be their eyes. They had rattling gold rings on their fingers, and their touch was like ice. In the adventures of Tom Bombadil, Tom encounters a Barrow-wight who is waiting for him in his home. Using his rhyming incantations, he orders the Barrow-wight away, a skill we will see later as well. In the early days of the War of the Ring, the Nazgul are searching for Baggins of the Shire. They enter the former Cardolan around September 24, 3018, and the Witch King personally goes to the Barrow-downs. He would remain there for 3 days, rousing the Barrow-wights. In The Lord of the Rings: A Reader's Companion by Hammond and Skull, it includes a piece of manuscript omitted from Unfinished Tales that, among other things, talks about the Witch King's actions here. It says that the Witch King empowered the Barrow-wights and killed nearby Dunedain rangers, specifically in order to trap the Ringbearer. This strategy would nearly work, as Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin come to the Barrow-downs on September 28th and are captured by a Barrow-wight. Frodo is the final hobbit to come under the influence of the evil creature. "Where are you?" Frodo cried, both angry and afraid. "Yeah," said a voice deep and cold that seemed to come out of the ground. "I am waiting for you." "No," said Frodo, but he did not run away. His knees gave and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up, in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were 2 eyes. Very cold, though lit with a pale light, that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip stronger and colder than iron seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. When he came to himself again, for a moment he could recall nothing except a sense of dread. Then suddenly he knew that he was imprisoned, caught hopelessly. He was in a barrow. A Barrow-wight had taken him, and he was probably already under the dreadful spells of the Barrow-wights, about which whispered tales spoke. He dared not move, but lay as he found himself, flat on his back upon a cold stone, with his hands on his breast. As he lay there, thinking and getting a hold of himself, he noticed all at once that the darkness was slowly giving way. A pale greenish light was growing round him. It did not at first show him what kind of a place he was in, for the light seemed to be coming out of himself and from the floor beside him, and had not yet reached the roof or wall. He turned, and there in the cold glow he saw lying beside him Sam, Pippin, and Merry. They were on their backs, and their faces looked deathly pale, and they were clad in white. About them lay many treasures, of gold maybe, though in that light they looked cold and unlovely. On their heads were circlets, gold chains were about their waists, and on their fingers were many rings. Swords lay by their sides, and shields were at their feet, but across their 3 necks lay one long, naked sword. Suddenly a song began, a cold murmur, rising and falling. The voice seemed far away and immeasurably dreary, sometimes high in the air and thin, sometimes like a low moan from the ground. Out of the formless stream of sad but horrible sounds, strings of words would now and again shape themselves, grim, hard, cold words, heartless and miserable. The night was railing against the morning of which it was bereaved, and the cold was cursing the warmth for which it hungered. Frodo was chilled to the marrow. After a while the song became clearer, and with dread in his heart he perceived that it had changed into an incantation. Cold be hand and heart and bone, and cold be sleep under stone. Never more to wake on stony bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. In the black wind the stars shall die, and still on gold he'll let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land. This barrow was likely the grave of the last prince of the former realm of Cardolan, who was killed when Angmar had been invaded. While Merry was trapped with the others in the barrow, he had dreams or visions that may have been the final memories of this very prince. He recalls being attacked by the men of Carn Dûm, the capital of Angmar. He not only recalls the battle, but specifically being pierced in the heart by a spear. In the end, Frodo recalls and recites the verse taught to him by Tom Bombadil. Once again showing his power over these evil creatures, Tom rescues the hobbits, and from the treasure hoard gives each of them a sword. These barrow blades, also known as daggers of Westerness, were made by the Dunedain of Cardolan during their war with the Witch King, specifically created for that conflict. Merry's blade in particular would be vastly important, as it would later help destroy the Witch King. Tom, meanwhile, takes a brooch from the treasure hoard, saying it was long ago worn by a fair woman that he and Goldberry had known. While we don't know for certain, it's possible that this woman was the wife of, or a family member to, the last prince of Cardolan. Taking the brooch for his Goldberry, Tom says he and his wife would not forget the woman to whom it belonged. After the War of the Ring, the destruction of the Witch King, and the defeat of his master, we aren't told what became of the Barrow-downs or the Barrow-wights. Given these spirits were enslaved by the Witch King, it's entirely possible that they passed away with the destruction of their master, leaving the lands near the old forest free from the nightmarish creatures that had haunted them for so long. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom Bombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Celebrimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, CCDC Red Team, Nerd Sidgeman Anytimer, Pelkey Sports Cards, Mookie the Brown, Christopher Carbaugh, Joe Tepper, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darracott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, Grant McGregor, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.